Welcome, everybody, to our members and guests. I'm Jason Foubert, DIA past president. The two key mandates of the Digital Imaging Association are to provide education and networking opportunities for our members. I hope you find the educational aspect worthwhile, and we invite your feedback. Our membership is comprised of pre-press, printers, packaging converters, designers, advertisers, print buyers, equipment and consumable manufacturers, and vendors. If you're with us as a guest, please consider joining the Digital Imaging Association. Today's session is an example of the high caliber meetings that we run. If you would like more information on membership, please either scan this QR code or contact Mark McLeod at 416-254-4941 or email her at mark@digitalimagingassociation.com. Like most trade associations today, financial stability does not come from the membership revenues alone. So we turn to the vendors and suppliers to support our goals. We are honored to continue to receive the support and recognition of the DIA's contribution to the graphics industry from the following companies. Platinum sponsors: Canon, HP, Innovative Display, INX, Konica Minolta, Landa, Spicers, Trinet Global Logistics. Our gold sponsors: Adobe, Fujifilm, Graphics Canada, Heidelberg, Kodak, Kongsberg Precision Cutting Systems, Mini Giants, Plastic and Paper. Silver sponsors: GMG Color, Significance Automation, Sydney Stone, and a bronze sponsor, Ultimate Tech. Please consider these companies and their demonstrated support of the industry when making your purchasing decisions. Technology for this webinar is generously provided by HP. Our moderator today is Stephen Longmire. He's the sales manager at Shipmaster Containers, division of Atlantic Packaging. Stephen's role includes promoting the company's offerings within the market, growing the sales team, approval of sales margins, and setting and implementing KPIs for the sales team. He's the lead pivot for both the export and rollout of the new Salesforce CRM system, customer experience survey, and measurement matrix. Stephen has served on the DIA board for 9 years. For you.
Thanks so much, Jason, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for attending both in person as well as virtually today. A little bit of housekeeping. Those in attendance physically, please mute your cell phones. And also, if you have a question from one of our panelists today, please raise your hand if you're physically here, or if you're attending virtually, please submit it in the chat request or question and answer tabs. If you want to direct it to one of our two panelists, please specify the panelist by name, or if it's just to both panelists, I'll present it to both as a whole. So today's session is game plan for MOE and MOL visits. Today, we're going to learn how to prepare your company for Ministry of Environment as well as Ministry of Labor visits. Our panelists today are Francis Edmonds, Head of Sustainable Impact for HP Canada. Francis is responsible for business development and oversees corporate social responsibility programs nationally. With a focus on sustainable procurement, Francis is driving meaningful change cross-sector that supports a more circular and sustainable economic future for Canada. With more than 35 years of experience, Francis is recognized as one of Canada's top sustainable professionals, having received 2 Clean 50 awards, is listed on the Canadian Women in the IT Channel Hall of Fame, and has led HP to become the most sustainable technology company within Canada. Prior to this role, Francis worked as an environmental health and safety manager in the chemical and pharmaceutical industries in Canada and was a Ministry of Labor inspector in the UK. She's qualified an industrial hygienist, expert at measuring workplace exposure to chemicals and other dangers, and a Canadian registered safety professional, or CRSP, but non-practicing girl. Our other panelist today is Mike Millard. He is the consultant of health and safety, environmental, and women's. Mike's multi-talented 38-year career in the print industry has seen him manage key roles in many successful Canadian companies, including that of a sustainable team leader, health and safety manager trainer, and director of pre-press services, as well as general manager at Ellis Imaging or Max Solutions. Mike's responsibilities have included installations, upgrades, staff training, project management, chair and creator of communication communities and continuous improvement for management teams, costing, R&D, daily production supervisor. He's a DIA board member and past president as well. And as a corporate sustainability leader, Mike brings unique expertise, having to navigate environmental compliance issues with government agencies at both the management as well as shop floor production level. Thanks to both of our panelists for joining us today. Oh. So I'd like to welcome our panelists to sort of share anything that they'd like to kind of lead off the session, and then we'll go into a question and answer period, both in person as virtually. But Francis, I don't know if you want to kind of share some insights on the topics of today that we'll be covering.
Sure. So a lot of what we're going to cover off today is, I would call, basic common sense, and ready to take your questions, of course. I guess one thing I'll just follow up with, I am a Canadian registered safety professional, but I'm non-practicing, so you cannot take any of the advice or information I'm going to give you as strict legal compliance advice, right? I have to say that from my professional designation perspective, but very excited to answer your questions and help you get ready for what will happen eventually, if you haven't already had a visit.
And Mike, same?
Yes, basically, I'm the guy that when they walk in, make sure that we make it as easy as possible. So I talk about some of the things that you can do before they walk in the door. Make sure you're not gonna go right through the ranks. If your company doesn't look that great when they first walk in, they're gonna really check everything. But if you have everything in order and documentation, equipment, cleanliness, say industrial hygiene, climate control, all sorts of things that are going to help. Expect it not to be. It'll give you an easier time. Let's just say it that way.
I might ask you just, Mike, to raise your voice a bit.
Oh, okay.
Because it has
Sorry.
microphone, so people
Okay.
online will have that. That's
Sure.
hearing you. Oh, that actually might segue into the first question I might ask is setting, you kind of alluded to, Mike, a bit, setting your company up for success. AKA, how do you avoid looking like you have a problem?
Well, there's things that you can do. Have communication with employees. A lot of time, communication committees. They'll and of course, health and safety committees. They'll let you know what's going on wrong out on the floor. Make sure you have your every 1 to 3 month meetings, depending on how you set it up. Like I said, health and safety and communication. Communication, I find better with managers. All the managers, basically, they're in control of the employees. So to have communication with the managers and also health and safety committee, and that's more of the employees that represent each area and each aspect of the company itself. So basically, in documenting everything and posting it as required. Those are key starting points, because if you're not communicating with your managers and you're not communicating, they communicate with the employees, and your employees aren't communicating properly with things that are wrong, whether it be a button on a press that's a stop button, emergency button, to cables laying on the floor that aren't covered. Pretty much there's everything from mats if they're standing long periods of time, mats. You know, go on and on, but these are some of the things that definitely help out, prevent injuries. That way, they're not going to call the Ministry of Labor. We can get into that kind of question after. What makes them walk through the door? Because they will walk through the door. So,
And Francis, kind of setting your company for success.
So what I'd ask you to do is I'd ask you to put a different pair of glasses on and walk through your front door and imagine you are an inspector coming in. And think about the kinds of things that would when I did this, I could walk into any factory and I could tell immediately that things were not as they should be, just by looking around. You don't even have to ask any questions. Obviously, talking to employees is a good tell too. But I'd ask you to go and do this with a fresh pair of eyes and just see what you see. And I wrote a list of the things that would be triggers for me as an inspector to start opening some more cubby holes or questions. And so the first thing is, how does it look? Is it cluttered? Are there obstructions on walkways? Does it look dirty? Is the garbage all over the place? So just how it looks in terms of cleanliness and organization is the first tell. Signage. You might think it's obvious, but you do need to put signs up. Where are the fire exits? Where are the fire extinguishers? Where can people eat and drink safely? Do they require personal protective equipment? Is it noisy? Is it dirty? Is it dusty? A good tell for me, particularly because I was very focused in those days on guarding and safety of equipment, particularly in print shops where often people are pulling guards off machines. That would have been the older style machines, perhaps not so much with digital equipment today, but I know we still have a lot of older equipment around. You see a guard raised or lifted or even taken off completely, that is a really big issue for a Ministry of Labour inspector, because it's showing you that your safety systems are not working. What does it smell like? Is there a strong chemical odor? Are there rags with solvents left around? Do you have proper disposals for them? They can catch fire, so they need to be managed properly. Where are your records kept? Is it cleared? Is your WMIS booklet somewhere visible and easy to access? Sometimes if you've had the fire department come through and do a pre-inspection just to make sure that things are safe, particularly if you're storing chemicals like flammables, they will ask you to put a WMIS box outside. We've already talked slips and trips. How are people standing? Mike talked about cables running across floors. In a busy workspace, making sure slips and trips are taken care of is a very basic thing, and it happens very quickly and all too often. And that's a kind of a no-brainer thing that you should be taking care of. So if there is a spill, it should be cleaned up immediately. Stop work. It's better to do that and take the small slowdown in production rather than have somebody getting injured and then being off work for extended days of time. Heating and cooling. Is it stinking hot in there? Is it freezing cold? Employees won't work very well when they're in high heat or too cold. Are you keeping inspection logs? If you don't have a formal joint health and safety committee because you're not big enough to qualify for that, that doesn't mean that you can't still do that. And nominating somebody to be in charge of that is particularly important because you need somebody to be responsible. It can't be a joint responsibility for that kind of thing. Doing regular safety inspections and documenting what you've done with the follow-up to make sure those actions that were identified are corrected, even if they're long-term corrective actions, is important. Safety of chemical and chemical management. Do your employees not to pour stuff down the drain? Not to pour stuff down the drain, right? You should never be putting anything down the drain, and you should be preventing things from going down the drain, even in the case of a spill. Talked about hazardous waste. If you have large containers of chemical storage, making sure that they're in secondary containment so that if it leaks overnight or whatever, it's not going down the drain. So you can buy a flammable storage cabinet, or you can buy skids that have containment on. There's lots of different ways to make sure spills don't get to where they shouldn't be. And, one legal requirement is that you do have a copy of the Occupational Health and Safety Act available. Sure, so that should be posted on a notice board somewhere. So those are the basic tells. When I walked into a facility, I'd be looking for that kind of thing, automatically saying, this is a well-managed place or it's not a well-managed place. And if it's not well-managed, where do I need to go next?
Great, very detailed. That's fantastic. Thank you. I'm going back to sort of Mike's comment about what triggered, like Mike, you kind of alluded to like maybe a discomfortable employee or an uncomfortable employee. Kind of what other things could trigger either a Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Labor thing? Could it even be like a service contractor that was maybe in the plant from a third party that noticed things and then flagged it? Like I'm not sure. I've been around the industry for a long time, but I haven't been on that sort of manufacturing floor to know firsthand.
So when we put presses in, we had, basically the vents went to the top of the building. And those were flexo presses. So the flexo presses emitted sound emissions. And across the rail tracks, believe it or not, is a housing development. The housing development heard this hum, and they automatically phoned the Ministry of Environment saying, we hear this hum all night long. And the whole neighborhood signed a petition and submitted it to us. So at that particular point in time, Ministry of Environment, they called the Ministry of Environment, and they walked through the door. And up on the roof, first they studied all the sound emissions that were inside the building. I had records of all the sound emissions, different parts of each piece of equipment. They loved that. They thought that was great. Sound emissions were fine within the building, but not on top of the building. So that's when we had to get an engineering firm in. Mufflers put on them, get on, everything. It's tens of thousands of dollars of basic structure changes to those pipes that were there. And also a sound wall had to be built. So that's one of the reasons the Ministry of Environment. Ministry of Environment, I know COVID is over, but they also came in to make sure the circulation of the building was good. What kind of ventilation did we have? Was the ventilation working? What kind of filters did we have? So all those things that, the air circulating in the building itself. And then of course there was, you had to make sure that your cabinets were all in the proper blowout and fire cabinets. That all sorts of types of chemicals were put in those special vented to the outside, but through filtration. So those are a couple of things. Ministry labor, it can be anything from a disgruntled employee that worked there. It can be anything from heat in the building, had somebody faint. And then other people said, so they came in just to do heat emission testing and what the temperatures were, all the different parts of each piece of equipment and everything, what it fell in. Humidex readings, did humidex readings on everything. I find that with the Ministry of Labor, like I say, is to make sure everything looks as good as possible all the time, and having somebody in control of that is very important. And don't show them everything. Don't start going, you got to see this. You know what? You are just yes and no. They ask, you reply. You don't offer anything else to them. Don't talk about anything else. Don't say anything else. You just simply, you're just receiving. You don't put out information of anything. I had him walk by the whole Flexo department because I knew it was an older Flexo and some of the guards probably weren't that great. That's not a great thing to do, but also the machine is very important and we do have light curtains, but didn't want to get into that. So they were there for heat. Another one was there strictly for policies, which was posted. So these are some of them are just all about paperwork. They're not there to look at your equipment. They're there to look at your program policies, working at heights, confined spaces, all these different things that they're there for. So you have these different type of Ministry of Labor people. They're there focusing. One was just focusing on our racking. We had to spend tens of thousands of dollars because they go through and there's a little dent in the corners and everything else. And then of course building beams so that the forklift drivers don't hit the corner of the rackings. Of course, then it would be like a domino effect that you'd have one heck of a mess on your hands. And hopefully it wouldn't kill anybody, but a lot of injuries that are reported, at least in Canada, are down in the warehouse. They're the highest rating for injury. So again, a lot of these Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Environment, they're there for something specific. They have their specialties they are coming in to look at, and you don't show them anything else. You can't just be cool and just nod your head and that. And yeah, you'll have orders. You will have orders. I had everything from a rubber stopper on the bottom of a ladder that you climb up to get your dies off a die rack, but they were worn out. So some of them you can do in a couple of days, some they give you 3 months, but they'll come back, they'll check it, and you have to have a sign off with another health and safety member too. So that's a brief synopsis, kind of what can trigger it. And sometimes in Durham, there isn't as much industry as Mississauga, so well, they have less buildings to hit. So
More often.
they came in 5 times in the 15 years that I was doing that particular building. And the industrial environment came in 3 times. Fire inspectors came in 5 times. So, and there's PAC certification and, you know, but with all of that, of course, that's a whole different set of rules and contamination, et cetera. But as I said, with the drums that you do collect things, you know, you put them in trays, you lock them off, cages, make sure that they're not by a shipping door where it could leak out into a sewer system. So.
Any other sort of triggers, Francis, in your experience,
So,
both in the UK and here?
You know, generally speaking, as an inspector, you have a lot of paperwork to do anyway. You're not looking for more paperwork, right? We're people too. We want to make sure that we're doing our job, but you know, if we have to come back, that's more paperwork. So if you make it easy at the front end, we're happy with that. We're on your side. We want you to win in this scenario. So when I was triggered to come to a facility, the top one is an accident, obviously. And so you need to make sure you have proper procedures for reporting accidents, right? That's a very critical thing. What to do in case of an accident or a spill. Complaints obviously can be, even it might not be your own employees, they can be anonymous too. So you might know who's made the complaint. And it's not good to try and sort of push on that one. You've had a complaint. Yes. Okay. Let's figure it out.
Yeah, not have a witch hunt, sort of trying to track down the source.
Right. From time to time, they'll also have specific enforcement. So I was part of some that would be on guarding issues, say on the printing industry or whatever. So they're going in looking at a specific thing, as Mike said. And then there's also a routine inspection. You know, as a factory inspector in the UK, I had thousands of factories. So the question is, I'm never going to get to all of them. So how do I decide how often I go back? And so there's a rating system, and it's based on, you know, how big you are, what kind of risks you have. And for most of you with hazardous chemicals and chemical exposure and machinery exposure, you're higher risk than, say, a library, right? So you're more likely to get an inspection from that perspective. So being ready, making sure you have good controls in place, that's the upfront guidance here.
I've even heard of like, and obviously we don't want to vilify any employee that comes forward, expresses safety concerns. That's obviously for the betterment of everybody, both there after they're gone or while they're still there.
And employees have the right to refuse unsafe work.
Yeah.
And if they think that they're being asked to do something unsafe, all they have to do is call the ministry, and the minister's ministry right in there, right? So now you're in a difficult confrontational situation almost.
Yeah.
So trying to avoid that upfront is prevention is always better than cure, for sure.
Yeah, I guess I would also education and empowering your staff to come to you internally first to mitigate any risks and problems that way too.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, and actually I'll start this with you, Francis. How does an inspector decide on an enforcement, given your previous experience?
Well, as I said, you really don't want to because it involves a lot more paperwork, but sometimes you just see it as being very necessary. And quite often it's because you're not getting a good reception on the other side. If the person you're talking to is being obstructive, very negative, refusing, that's a warning sign, and that means, okay, we need to get out the warrant now. We need to get out some more formalized paperwork. Sometimes they'll do it because they want to come back and just check that it's important enough that they do need to know that it's being done, chemical exposures, etc. So uncooperative management is usually the issue. If you can see that there's tension between employees and management as well, that's sometimes something that's going to trigger you to want to make an enforcement, particularly if it's a complaint issue. All right. Repeated complaints. We'll do this. So again, if you do get a complaint, whether it's from outside or inside, it's really important to address it. Leaving it to fester isn't going to make things any better. It's going to make it worse. And then it's really about serious risks. You know, a bent upright on a high racking.
Yeah.
That's a serious risk because it means the forklift already hit it and they're likely to hit it again. You know, where's your forklift driver training certificates? You know, are you doing your forklift daily inspections? You know, those kinds of things. But that's a very high risk. Racking coming down does kill people and it's a very high risk. Things like not having inspections for pressure vessels like your compressors or your forklifts, lifting gear, right? They all need to have been safely, have their regular safety checks and specific inspections to make sure that they're safe for use, basically.
Yeah, startup and shutdown procedures, say logged it all in, said the forklift, they looked at our reports, where we daily checking them, you know, and filling it out. Dating, and those were all looked at. Yeah, so those are really, really important things. Documentation is very important. And the Ministry of Labor, they're in for documentation. They're really thorough. I had working at Heights policy, and then he said, "Where's your program?" And I went, "Program?" Yeah, you have the policy, then you have the program, and it has to be signed off. And I went, "Wow, okay, didn't know that." So it's a bit of a learning experience. There's policies, programs, and training records have to be kept up to date. Certifications, where's all the forklift certifications? I had a little binder. And, you know, when you know what you're doing, they'll come in and they'll just pinpoint a couple things. So we don't need to see every record, but we want to see this record, this record, this record, this record. They may only ask for half a dozen. But then can't produce those half a dozen. And they start
Opening the full book.
full book. Yeah. So, and they are important, because it is machinery. If a forklift malfunctions, well, it's got something in the middle of the air. That's not so good. No. So it is important for sure, but yes.
Well, and again, you know, if you're watching how forklift drivers are behaving, you know, if they're running along with even without a load, but with the
Yeah.
forks raised, or if they're moving around with loads raised, you know, putting people up in buckets and, you know, like very common things, but, you know, really need to be stamped out. Like it's those risks, and people working at heights do that. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Actually, I'll jump ahead a couple of questions and based on the record keeping aspect. So, like we've gone through like training requirements, chemical storage, plan, flammables, spill kits, first aid, all of that. Where kind of whose responsibility are those within a company, Mike, and yours? Are they kind of all under what your health and safety would have been? Are they multiple departments' responsibility that is a shared requirement, or?
Well, I mean, your health and safety committee is supposed to work as a team. And it's something that I found, you know, the 12 individuals, I found that all they did was when they saw something, they just run to me. I said, no, the whole point of the committee is not to rely on me. Okay, you're part of the committee. You look after what has to get done. Talk to the manager of the department. So these are the most important things. Trying to get people to take responsibility when they join these committees. It's one of the toughest things, for sure. It is. Instead of them just going like, well, that was the first aid guy. Oh, so-and-so cut his finger. Well, we have a first aid post at the team. Everybody come running to me, should, you know, Johnny go to the hospital because he slashed his finger? Well, you know, you're 47 or 48 years old. I think you know, but it's true. It's kind of pushing responsibility to one person. So the question was, who is the person that kind of organizes? Yeah, you can have an organizer, but it's a team. Yeah, it has to be done as a team. It'll be overwhelming. Trust me, I know it will be overwhelming. Because a lot of the time, health and safety back in the old days was, you know, a witness. That was about it. Then the government decided to just expand after injuries mounted in different types of businesses and industries over the years. So it's gotten to be a giant now. So what happens is sometimes, well, so-and-so's not that busy. I guess they could be the health and safety person, but it goes way beyond that nowadays, not 2025. No, you have to have a person doing it full time. Any kind of company that's really over 50 people. Yeah.
you also need an executive who's responsible. Needs to be a throat to choke. They may not be doing the day-to-day activities, but they need to be responsible. It needs to be part of their job description and preferably their compensation.
Yeah.
That shows that they have taken the measures necessary to make sure the procedures and policies and practices are in place, that it's adequately resourced, you know, whoever it is that's doing the different things. but an executive needs to be responsible for it, because otherwise it can slip through the cracks. And somebody at a senior level, just like for sustainability, needs to have overarching responsibility, which means they need to understand it too, so they need training as well.
That's a great point, tying it to actually a financial remuneration for them,
Oh, yeah.
because everyone obviously needs to get paid,
So
so.
we all
you
have,
could-
we all have KPIs, and that's what motivates people in business. So give them a KPI, zero infractions from the different whatever, zero injuries, whatever, whatever else it might be, but they need strong goals, and that needs to come from the CEO, that this is an important thing. And CEO talking about safety is particularly important, because monkey see, monkey do.
It always trickles down,
Yeah.
so it becomes part of the culture, which is key. So
It's true, because myself, I did the train the trainer and different things, but also I even did the working at heights. Because when this engineering team came in, even they say they're, licensed and everything else, so I went and took the train the trainer and but make sure they're doing everything right on top of the roof and following their own guidelines. But yeah, then I had to go up there, make sure everything was compliant, also have about 4 people. Believe it or not, one of them was IT because he did wiring. Was constantly up on a wall, on a ladder and, and I saw that and I thought, I think he should be part of train the trainer. You're always up there, the ceiling tiles and everything else and,
running landscape.
yeah, and they are, and it's, so, absolutely. Then the people that come in, electricians and stuff, I've caught them without their vests and lanterns and everything on. I've called them down, so, but yeah, that's where senior management has to turn around and make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing it correctly. You don't want an accident administrator ever coming through because he fell off of a skyjack. You don't want that.
Well, and as I was going through my training to become an inspector, I had to drive forklifts. I had to go into trenches and inspect shoring in trenches, working at heights. I had to go into a burning building with a full respirator on. Like, they put us through the training so we could actually understand why it was so important and what the nuances.
Actually, there's a great kind of, it's not a question that we had as one of the set ones. And please, I'd encourage anyone in the room or online as well to submit their own questions. I'll get to you, Dan, in a moment. In terms of having a third party come in, like an electrician you mentioned, Mike, working at heights in your facility, are you bound to hold them accountable to your internal? Or are they as part of an insured third party?
Just like a person, it's like a person that's fixing your roof, yeah, you've got responsibilities. They're now on your soil. You got to make sure 100%. There's a form that they fill out that when they come through the door to do work, that there's an understanding and licensing that has taken place. So for sure, before they step foot in your building, you have your personal form, because now they are your responsibility too. Even if they say they're licensed, it does not matter. I mean, it matters, but it's still your accountability.
Would mitigate some of the liability, I'm guessing, but not fully, or no, none at all?
No, because you're in control of the workspace.
Yeah.
So, and it's been a lot of legal pushes on this and testing of it, and the law still holds you accountable because ultimately it's your facility, you are accountable.
Well, that was just my own
Mm.
basic
Yeah.
conversation. Dan, I'd like to.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we are now in a new era, new generations coming into the workforce. We are in a printing industries universe where there's older equipment, and some of the people who may have trained people on that equipment are no longer in our industry anymore. My question really goes to what is enough training for people to use older equipment in our like young people, and how do we train these young people to operate older equipment per se, and how much training is required?
So let's do a quick, what's the risk, right? So we've got pinch points, probably the biggest one, right? Could even have an electrical hazard at some point, right? If they're pulling equipment apart. We've got the chemical exposure potentially, and sort of use of personal protective equipment would be my top 4 that I would pull up there. When you've got young employees, you have an even greater duty of care. Probably in the UK, I took my own prosecutions in court, and the only two that I took in the 5 years I was a factory inspector were for fingers being chopped off of young people, right? They're dumb. They don't really know much. You really have to have a greater duty of care to very young people when they're first in the workplace. So I would argue that there is no such thing as too much training for them, really. They need to be constantly reminded, and they don't have the basics of common sense in a workplace. You have to teach them basic workplace stuff as well as now how to work with older machines. And that's why idiot proofing things is better than trying to train people to work with data. Right, so if you have an option to guard something rather than relying on a person to be alert and attentive all the time, your guard is a much better option, even if it's inconvenient and then you have to stop the machine to take the guard up to fix something. It's a better way to go about it. Just as with personal protective equipment, it's far better to have exposure control at source than to put people in more and more personal protective equipment, whether it's noise, whether it's chemicals, because nobody wears PPE 100% of the time. You recall during COVID how hard it was to wear a mask just for whenever you happen to be going out or whatever. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't fit well. If you've got facial hair, it's not good. And PPE, when as an industrial hygienist for a mask, it will give you what it's supposed to protect you. But as an industrial hygienist, you only take 10% of that as a given protection. So really, you have to go up quite high in terms of, full masking and air purifying to get really good protection. So extraction at source is better. Maybe then you end up with a noise on the roof issue, but, thinking about that as you're designing extraction systems beforehand rather than after is always a better thing. So in summary, young people need a lot of full-rounded training, and I'd encourage you to have them job shadow for as much as possible. I know you said a lot of the older folk are gone now, but also having team leads keep a close eye on them, right? Watching for bad habits and nipping them in the bud, right? Because they will develop bad habits. Everybody does, right? So that's one way to keep it. And then maybe even some, when you're doing that job shadowing, some competency assessment. Are you seeing them do silly things? Catch them, and some people are just not good at working with machinery. It's just a fact, right? I mean, you can't idiot proof everything, but you can try your best.
Yeah. Try to take shortcuts and you might cheat
Yeah.
a few times, but
Yeah.
it'll get you eventually.
That answered the question.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, even older equipment, had people come in, when they start training, instead of having somebody can do 60%, 70%, just say a die cutting press.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, basically, they go in, they're taught 60, 70%. But I always think that it was good, we'd have a BOPS day, or we'd have a Komori day for the printing press, and they would come in. And you'd usually have one every 3 to 6 months. Hell, you bought their product, you bought their machine. Why can't they turn around and do some updates or upgrades, or this should now be fixed? We actually have a fix for this in New Jersey where the BOPS is, and we'll send that up to you. So it's like I say, it's about keeping track of your own equipment through the experts, and then they sit there and go, oh, did you know that you can do this with this machine? This is how you can prove doing this. So it's important to have communication with the machine manufacturers for sure. They can teach things that maybe other people never knew. So
I had to take health and safety with my new role for both level 1 and level 2. First time I had to do that. To your point, Francis, 30% greater risk for young workers than people that are more experienced. So people tend to rush and take shortcuts. Stefan?
One example that I'd like to bring, maybe how to train, younger people. Obviously, we're a large organization but there's some practices that can probably be taken from other places. So at the Windsor Mill, between 2015 and 2020, they had identified that there would be a lot of retirements.
Yeah, right.
So, and it was like 200 people a year that were leaving, based on the fact that the mill was built in 1987. You just add when people are retiring. So what they created is a library of videos done by the operators where they would actually show, here's how I do this job. And then they created a library. It's stored on the cloud. And we're all printers here in the business. Every location where where the video was created had a QR code or has a QR code. And if you're not sure how the task has to be done, or you want to show it's done, well, there's an experienced worker, they'll say, this is how we did it. You go in there, you check on the QR code and it plays the video of how this task is done. I think it's such a great way of doing it. And it was a good way to transfer knowledge from the older generation to the newer guys coming in. And I think that was to me, well, that's one of the best practice I've seen in terms of how to make sure you retain all that knowledge.
Were you able to track how many people who had watched the video? So you could call that training, because that would be.
And, you know, you're talking about training, there's one law in the province of Quebec that I think we should have across the country, where you're obligated to dedicate 1% of your payroll to training in Quebec. And companies who don't do it, the first year, if you don't do it, you just have to pay the penalty and write a check for the difference. And usually companies get caught 1 year. The second year, they'll train. And I think this is something we should have everywhere, because training, there's never not enough training. There's never too much training. We just have to train all the time in so many different ways. And we should all invest into this. And safety, you talk about KPIs, my bonus is related to our company safety record. If we have a poor safety record, I got a portion of it that I won't touch, even though if it's something that's not me, it's just, we're all collectively responsible for it. And that's the number one task in our company, is safety. The first thing we talk about is safety. Then we talk about the other thing. We have a meeting that starts. We'll start by talking about where the emergency exits are, and where especially in the south, where the hurricane shelters are, where to make sure that you're protected. So that's how all our meetings start, to make sure. So safety is always the number one priority, and then everything else after that. If you're safe, everything else should happen properly.
So a lot of this grew out of DuPont, one of the founders of the safety culture and training systems. And what they used to do was they would have their managers plus their families live on site. These are explosive plants. So that's a really big way to get people to be very focused on it. Right?
Wow.
Well, if your family was there, and equally important as your employees, right?
Yes.
So
Wow.
then no
Lot to lose.
corners get cut that way.
I don't have a question, I'm more of an experience, as we're talking about workplace safety and signage. In the early 90s, I had the opportunity to visit the Quebec ore plant, just outside of Paris, France. And what they planned for this plant was it was going to print 10% of the magazines for the entire country of France. And they spent a year planning it, they spent a year building it, and they built it near a small town. The town grew threefold very quickly. But the interesting thing about the plant was when you walked into it, it was stark gray, except every piece of stationary equipment was painted fuchsia, including the skids, including the tow motors, everything. They had walkways and they were small guardrails. They were all painted fuchsia. So it was virtually impossible to bang into something or trip over something in that plant. And their workplace safety record was phenomenal. They'd go 300 days without an incident. And it was just quite interesting. Now, to see 10 web presses and 2 gravure presses side by side that were painted fuchsia was amazing. It was an experience that I've never had anywhere else.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, obviously there are big companies, there are small companies. So I represent a small company. As you just said, the rules apply to big or small. But with a small company with such a small team, like what are those like elementary stuff? Like you have just 7 people working there. Like how to control those, stuff like cell phones, the life of a pressman, a lot of them hide and seek game, try to smoke here and there. They go out, but again, you catch them, you tell them, but it's difficult. So like how you address those kind of stuff,
Do you,
like smaller companies?
yeah, do you have a high turnover or are they typically people stay in the job?
They stay like, it's kind of, I would say 12 hours.
No, but I mean, are you getting a lot of new employees coming in?
No,
or it's
not-
the same-
not-
Okay,
not-
so it's the
yeah.
same 7 people,
Yeah,
right? So you've
yeah.
got an opportunity to lay the law down,
Yeah,
point out that safety is number one.
yeah,
And here's how we're gonna do it. And maybe you sit down and have a safety meeting once a week or something like that,
Yeah.
that reinforces with them that it's important and gives them an opportunity to tell you openly, you
Yeah.
know, what the issues are, because the people on the shop floor are the people who know what the issues are, right?
Exactly,
They're gonna tell
exactly.
you.
and which
so
we
you-
do, yeah,
So you have to have a culture where it's okay, you make it okay for them to tell you what's wrong. And then you take some action to fix it. If they keep telling you and nothing happens, then they're gonna stop telling you,
Yeah.
right? So it's in a smaller environment, you know, you don't have to have a joint health and safety committee, but you can do similar things because you're closer to the employees too.
yeah. So what kind of records are required to really maintain in these kind of,
Well, you're still required to have women's training,
yeah, which, okay,
depending on whether you're
Yeah.
handling chemicals or not. If you've got people working at heights, you still need, if you've got people going into tech, you know, it's hard for me to tell not knowing exactly what you're doing there. You need a first aider, I would
Yeah,
say. So those are the bare minimums, I
Yeah.
would say. But then, you know, somebody to write, depending on the risks of what you're doing, some procedures down and have somebody being in charge of making sure everybody knows how to manage the risks. It's
Yeah.
risk assessment, basically.
yeah. Okay,
I will ask one of the other
Did you have another question over there?
Oh, do you have another question?
Did you have a question?
No.
No?
Sorry.
I was just give disturbance.
Commenting on the fact that
Okay.
he has CPR training.
Oh.
And I'm saying I wouldn't save them.
I guess we'll kind of shift a little bit to environmental because we're doing a lot of labor. When does an environmental compliance approval or ECA have to be performed? Like size, location, type of industries, or what's the trigger? What's the threshold for that? Start. Maybe with Francis?
I don't know much about this. 'cause
Okay,
It's
sorry.
not my area.
Well, basically, you can go out and to, Sonair, a company, GTA area, and ask for that. You can try to do as much as possible. If the Ministry of Environment comes through, you've done your due diligence and can show everything before you start hiring engineering firms to come in. Unless you're being by a customer told they want to see an ECA, an environmental compliance approval, unless they want that. It's like some of them want a PAC Secure, some of them want ISO, et cetera, et cetera. Unless they're requiring that you have that done, I would say no. No. If you want to do it, and you have the money and you think it'd be a great idea, then go right ahead. But I don't see any kind of thing of going out, unless you've got so much money to make that happen. Because then when you do, whether it be the mufflers on the roof or the air quality, I had two different engineering firms in. Because now I'm being forced to, And yeah, we had to change some of the inks that we were using for sure. We did have to change a little bit of ventilation. We did have to change the sound. But we were on top of everything that was inside as far as hearing protection. We actually had 3 different levels of hearing protection. The pressmen didn't want the big heavy ones put on a massive web. So they were okay with just the simple earplugs, there's different decibel readings of that knocks down. So then the next was the headphones, and then there's the heavy duty ones that the jackhammer guys would turn around, the strippers would use, because you're up around 120, 130 decibels. So yeah, because press guys even had to argue with them, going, well, I can't hear the way the press is running if I got these damn things in my ears. And I go, well, you're 89 decibels, so that's it. You got to wear. I get used to it. They're just a little stubborn in the beginning, but you got to post signs. Hearing protection must be worn here. We tried doing the whole building, but then you're just running around chasing people. So But when you put that right at their machine, that this machine, you know, emits the sound level of 98, then it's right in their face. Literally, I hung it right over where they were feeding the machine, and like, right over. It was right there. So as soon as they sit at the end, they go, well, you. And you know, like I say, sometimes you have to make it idiot proof. Steps that you make if they're not going to listen, right? And it's human nature not to listen a lot of the time. It's human nature to just go, oh. And it's true. You know, you may have 50 employees and 42 of them are great. You'll have 8 that aren't. So you've got to shove it under their face. So, yeah.
And just on that personal protective equipment, you also need to make it flexible. You can't just say this is one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
Different people have different needs. On hearing protection, you know, you often get that response of, oh, I can't hear, you know, I'm using sound to tell whether my machine is running properly, or I won't be able to hear if somebody tells me I'm in danger. Actually, the way hearing protection works, it actually allows speech frequencies through and cuts out the dangerous frequencies. So you will actually hear conversations or people calling to you better with hearing protection on than you would if you were just in a noisy environment. So that's a common misconception that people don't know about.
Yes, filters out all the noise and allows. To that point, they say they can't hear the machine running well. If they don't wear protection, they won't be able to hear anything very long. So.
And on that note, just quick note of that, I had a call from a person that was there. They left about 3 years before I came on board. And yeah, they basically were going after hearing aids. We had to turn around and pay for their hearing protection. And then the ministry contacted and said, we'd like to see your records from 17 years ago. Well, I wasn't there, and there was no records of the piece of equipment that they were working on at that particular time. So you just go, hey, we had to pay for it. So anyway, no records.
Any other questions from here in the room at all or online? I don't see any chats or questions submitted online. I'll spin to something a little more printer based then. Paper, dust, offset spray, typically cover everything. Refer to kind of the annual cleanups here before we were talking today. Is this an issue? Both for, I guess, would be respiratory, machine health, all of that. So start maybe with you, Francis, in terms of you can speak
Yeah,
it from
so-
across the pond as well as here.
So any contaminants in your workplace air, particularly, you know, you're there for 8-10 hours a day, right? It's not good. You could have people who have, even if you're within the occupational exposure limit, but you'd have to test to show that, right? Paper dust is not a hazardous dust, but it still can be an irritant. And if you've got people who have asthma or whatever, generally keeping your workplace as clean as possible is just a good manufacturing practice. That's what, so I come from a pharmaceutical industry too, where you don't have any dust, but, you know, the other piece is it is flammable, so there's an explosion risk. If you had enough air moving around to create a sudden gust and it blew off a whole bunch of dust and then you have a spark, you can. Good housekeeping is just a basic thing to do.
And it can influence print quality too. It's getting into machinery. So,
Yeah, I think just the way they actually thought not to sit there. I ended up in Humber Hospital. I was walking by, this was a transcontinental. I was walking by a press and they were just spraying it down the press and everything and right into my eye. I had my eyeball scraped. And I was just walking by.
So spraying it with water or air?
Air.
Compressed air, right? So,
Pressed air, he's firing it away and I just happened to
Yeah,
walk by and it went right in my eye.
so rather than blowing dust, you should be sucking it, right? And using compressed air, particularly for blowing dust off people, is a real big no-no because you can actually blow it into their pores. So that's quite dangerous. You should not be doing that at all. So vacuuming is always better than blowing, and of course HEPA filtration on vacuum. Oh, that's good. It's very common, just like it used to be, and it's not true in any of your situations, but you know, cleaning hands with a solvent. Right? People think that skin is impermeable, but it actually isn't. And solvents are very, they used to do it with benzene. Like, I mean, that.
Right to the liver.
Yeah, right. So those are some of the old school things you wouldn't want to create a video of and pass on to the next generation, right? So.
So I'll do one more question if we don't have any more in the room at all, or anyone online. This is kind of more for facility, I guess, the conditions of bathroom facilities. Is this a cause for any issues with Ministry of Labor or Ministry of the Environment?
Well, we didn't get into, and this is a very common thing for people to be eating and drinking in places that have right? That's an absolute no-no. It came out of the old days of lead dust and other things, but equally, whenever you're putting food in your mouth, there's a likelihood that what's on your hands is going to end up in your body. So separate eating and drinking places, I would, if I saw coffee cups around where hazardous chemicals were, I'd be time out. That would be a real big issue. And it's something to be quite sticklerish about because it happens all the time, right? But that's a clear sort of church and state thing that should be completely separate. So bathroom facilities are a good example of, if I walked into a bathroom and it was messy, then you're not taking care of your employees, right? Bathrooms should be cleaned regularly. The risk of contamination and infection. I was just on a hospital call. I do quite a bit of work on hospital sustainable procurement. They were talking about infection rates, bathrooms being the worst place. So very important to have good, high hygiene in bathrooms for sure.
Further, yeah, we actually had one of the calls was because of the men's bathroom. Because it's also a locker room too. And people would bring their lunches and leave it in there, and not supposed to. There's a cafeteria fridge for the workers, 2 of them actually. They just weren't using them. They were maybe worried someone might take their sandwich or something, I don't know. But they were called, then 2 of the fans out of the 4 weren't working in the bathroom. One of the toilets was running on. Even though they're cleaned by a cleaning company once a day and logged. So both bathrooms had to be totally redone, new lockers, new everything, new sinks. So that was one thing that we had to do. The Ministry of Labor said, you gotta fix that. And what they do, they came in the plant, goes, I just had a couple of coffees, can I go to the bathroom? And I'd say, well, the office bathroom. No, I'll go use the plant bathroom. And they did. Oh, no. And 3 out of the 5 times, the Ministry of Labor, when they came in, they wanted to use the plant bathroom. So yeah, bathrooms are very important.
But the other easy tells is fire exits being blocked, and that happens all. Access to fire extinguishers and fire exits being blocked.
Yeah, you're right. People tend to use it as an extra storage facility. It's going to be temporary, but you never know when
Well, and
fire exit will be needed.
so it
this
should be an absolute no-no.
Yeah.
If you are a manager walking through a plant and you see a fire exit blocked, you stop and you don't go anywhere else till you've cleared that fire exit, right? It is, well, and fire being a particularly poignant thing right now.
Yeah. Exactly. Any other questions at all from anyone in the room or anyone online? It's been a quiet online presence thus far from our 19 participants. Okay, well then, at this point, I'd very much like to thank Francis and Mike for their time today, and everyone who attended both in person and online. I'd like to also thank and acknowledge our sponsors again from the Digital Imaging Association, with our platinum sponsors being Canon, HP, Innovative Displays, Inks, Konica Minolta, Landa Digital Printing, Spicers, and Trinet Global Logistics. Our gold sponsors being Adobe, Fujifilm, Graphics Canada, Heidelberg, Kodak, Mini Giants, Kongsberg Precision Cutting Systems, tongue twister, and paper and plastic and paper. Silver sponsors being GMG Color, Significance Automation, as well as Sydney Stone Print Finishing. Our bronze sponsor is Ultimate Tech. So thanks again for HP for their ongoing support of hosting this meeting and donating the technology used today. And as always, today's session has been recorded and the recording will be posted on the DIA YouTube page. The link will be available within a week. And if you'd like it, please feel free to email Marg, M-A-R-G, at digitalimagingassociation.com. And a knowledge resource synopsis will be distributed to everyone who's attended today, both in person as well as online. This is a member benefit that DIA started in January of 2023 and has been issued for all meetings since that time. As well, we'd like to announce the DIA Inkish TV. We're honored to be affiliated with Inkish TV. Inkish is the #1 unbiased source of news and information in the global print community. and free access to all Inkish TV events worldwide and inkishtv.com. So exclusive in North America will be for the DIA members only. There we go. We got a comment from one of our attendees thanking us for the session today. Upcoming DIA events. So Wednesday, February the 19th is a tour and demonstration at Spicer's newly updated technology center. Thursday, April the 10th will be the Graphics Canada breakfast with a keynote speaker of Morton Reithoft of Inkish TV with his print prognosis, an inkling of what's next. Maybe me getting my tongue untied with what's next. And Wednesday, May the 21st, professional and operational liabilities, protection for printers. And lastly, but not least, already looking for summer, Thursday, June 12th, we'll have the Digital Imaging Association annual golf tournament, once again at the Nottawasaga Resort. Watch your inbox for the DIA's sponsored spotlight, which we'll be promoting forthcoming. Okay, it's a targeted printing industry news update that will arrive in your inbox as a printable PDF once a month. This email will keep you up to date on the new products and services available from our valued sponsor. It will also include comments on current and future trends and issues while keeping you abreast regarding what's happening at these industry-leading companies. We hope you find it helpful. Join the DIA today and scan this QR code, please. We'll let Ali hold this for a time being, and I will once again do our sign off and thank you for joining us today. And we hope you found it educational and fun and an appreciation of the generous contribution of their time today by Francis and Mike. We'll be making a donation on behalf of them to the Canadian Print Scholarship Fund. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending.
Well done.
That was awesome.